Shine on all my people who've been broken hearted. Shine on from the place where all life had been started. When you need fresh air, go beyond horizons to your place in the sun. Shine on, let your heart be boundless like your faith in the one. It's crazy, crazy, crazy. Don't tell me that you don't care. It's crazy, crazy, crazy. No stopping of this warfare. It's crazy, crazy, crazy. We're breathing in the same air. It's crazy, crazy, crazy. Don't tell me that you don't care. You don't care. No stopping to this warfare. And you don't care. No.
The drastic social changes needed to combat this problem must be preceded by a pervasive and widespread internalization of the gravity of the problem. How can this be accomplished? How does the scientific community contribute to everyday understanding of the mechanisms behind the problem? And does the current community communicate the problem effectively to facilitate this necessary internalization?
I think what practical ethicists and practical philosophers are able to do is sort of try to figure out, okay, let's look at this problem and see how we might solve it. I think the role that philosophers play in it is to be able to articulate in compelling ways what it is that we're doing and why it is that we shouldn't be doing it. And that's what philosophers can do. And in that regard, many, many people's minds can be changed by those arguments, and then those people can take different avenues to make change. So I think the philosophical work can play an important role in either starting activist movements or in shifting the direction of activist movements, and we've seen it sort of happen, so it's kind of exciting.
Ironically, I think of our obligation as trying to figure out how to displace obligation as the central term, even while recognizing that as long as we do not experience ourselves as connected with the resources and sentient beings and non-sentient forms of nature around us, even while we don't experience that connection, we do have obligations, right? We need to shift and reshape our ways of experience so that things become second nature. Almost any platform of environmental engagement is subject to a kind of deflation. That's just a symbolic gesture, right? Recycling or whatever. You think you're going to save the earth by putting that bottle in that little receptacle. It's true that any given thing we do by itself is a drop in the bucket, so to speak. But I think that there are ways of interrupting the alienation from the processes around us that have a self-catalyzing effect. So let me put a few things out there. Obviously, our connection to food. We're alienated from our food and from our waste. Reconstructing our relationship to food growth and to handling human waste is, in some sense, merely symbolic, but to engage in that is to just gradually dismantle the kind of obliviousness that we maintain somewhat willfully against our interconnectedness. That we have a tendency to find ways to interrupt the continuity of space and place. So when we get into a car and close the door, it's as if we've entered into a little capsule, right? And then we emerge someplace else. So all those things give me a reason to think that symbolic gesture is a little bit of has a snowball effect on my awareness. I think there's a dynamic conversation or dialogue between what goes on in philosophy and what goes on elsewhere. It's not immediate. Philosophers don't generally aim to provide the immediate tools for activism. But there's also a way in which our core philosophical concepts orient our relationship to things around us. I see the importance of environment or ecologically robust conceptions as demanding a revolution in philosophy that in turn will give back to our ability to think well about the environment in the larger culture. Although I want to agree that there's a contrast between academic work and activism, an important contrast, to suggest that the contrast is between the unbiased and the fully engaged is a mistake. That is, academic work is also engaged. This is a philosophical view, but it's one that I take to be supportable enough that I have no qualms about pressing it as relevant to all disciplines. And that is, all representations are actually forms of action. So although there are strategies of making one's representations accessible to as many people as possible, relevant to as many practical debates as possible, there is no form of action, including words, that doesn't lean. Like the word bias means to lean. Right? All representation leans into practical relevance. I think the notion that we have data that is just sitting there, and then we have to decide, oh my goodness, am I going to do something about this, is exactly the picture I want to oppose. There's not an environmental earth scientist out there who doesn't have a personal history that informs how they came to take these problems seriously.
I still believe that we can be objective, meaning that we can obtain data objectively, have it inspected by absolutely anybody. In other words, keeping information in the public domain, but then still being willing to be active about it.
If people ask me if I believe in climate change, then I always say never ever use the word believe. I've been dealing with creationists forever, being a paleontologist. And so when I give my professional opinion, I'm convinced by the evidence. I never believe. Right? And so I think this is very important, that us as scientists should make sure the words that we use, because some such as belief have been co-opted. The other thing is that whenever we talk about that in the geological past, we have seen things like global warming, then a number of people have the reaction, oh, that means that it isn't bad for the world right now. And the answer there is yes, it is not bad at all for the world, it just will be bad for human civilization since we're in the way. The world won't care at all.
You know, if you look at the history of activism, there was Vietnam, there was civil rights, and all of those things were instantaneous and actually sometimes were cases of life and death. This is a matter of life and death, both economically and in the coastal area, worldwide, a matter of life and death, but it's 20 years away, and that's where the problem comes in. People don't feel it as an acute threat. And it's only when something like Katrina happens, everybody goes, oh, up in arms, and why don't we build better levees and better dikes? If it's not an acute threat, it's very hard to get the larger populace even interested in it, and to get young folks like yourself up in arms about doing things if the threat is in essence a slightly longer term threat. And that's where one of the problems is in organizing and getting people to be involved. And getting, indeed, the environmental cost internalized in the price of anything and everything has never happened, and everybody will try to avoid that, at any price, so to say. Yeah. And so then you indeed radicalize the whole thing and become, to some degree, opposed to the whole American way or the whole Western way of living. And yep, that's one option, and climate may be the catalyst for many people of doing that.
Yeah, I think one of the big problems is that whenever you talk to people who are interested in your work, you're already preaching to the choir, right? And so I think one of the big problems in science communication is to talk to the non-choir. And so this is really, really difficult to think of a way in which you can get people interested who are not interested. So probably what we'll have to do is indeed come up with people who write blockbusters about climate change and make movies that are a bit better based in science than The Day After Tomorrow, but that bring in huge numbers of people.
Those who start wars never fight them. And those who fight wars, they never like them. And those who write laws, they can recite them. And those of us who just fight laws, we live and die them. But I know they're never gonna tell you why, no. They only wanna tell you lies, no. Never ever gonna tell you why, no. They only wanna tell you lies, no. Never ever gonna tell you why, no. They only wanna tell you lies. It's time. It's time to go home. Don't take our boys away, no. Don't take our girls away, no. Don't take our boys away, no. Don't take our girls. It's time to go home. Don't take our boys away, no. Don't take our girls away, no. Don't take our boys away, no.
Once the public fully embraces the severity of what's really going on, action to stop it must then follow. What are effective tactics and strategies climate justice activists can employ? And what conflicts arise between engaging in activist work and performing academic study around climate science?
If there's a scientist who is also an activist, it sort of lowers their regard of that of the science that the scientist is doing. And then coupled with that, the example I gave, for example, with Jim Hansen, that if you go out and be an activist on a certain issue, and then in the future collect data that counteracts or disputes or rejects some of the things you were doing with that activism, would you be able to go ahead and communicate those ideas, even though you have this history of activism that was sort of counter to what you're now finding? And that goes hand in hand with, I think that might be one reason why people are sometimes more skeptical of the pure science that scientists who are also activists do. I mean, I suppose the traditional model would be for the activists to, well, somehow the scientific information is communicated to the activists' communities, and then they then do their job, right, and activate. Right. With regards to the climate issue, I think one reason why people like Jim and others are starting to cross that divide is because they've gotten so frustrated with how their message, in the pure scientific sense of the word, is not getting sort of propagated in what you think is the normal sort of channels, and so they're sort of taking it on themselves to do that, both generate the data and then activate it, if you will.
I think there's a pretty big move by our opposition to debunk the climate science, that they either want to make it like climate change is not existing, it doesn't exist and it's just a fraud and a hoax, or the more savvy ones basically say it's not going to be as bad as everybody's saying it needs to be. So I do think we need to devote resources to not only like making sure that science continues, like scientific research continues, but I also think we need to devote resources to support scientists in like media and public relations, because right now, Exxon and Peabody Coal are putting a lot of money into trying to debunk what they have to say, and they're doing it pretty effectively, even though, the United Nations, panel on climate change has 2,500 leading climatologists from around the world that says climate change is here and it's, a dire problem, but, Exxon has like a dozen, and yet they're able to promote them because they have more money and a lot of resources. And so I do think resources should go into that, but I also think resources should go into, supporting communities as well.